All right, good afternoon. Now I'd like to bring the special meeting of Township of Langley Council for the budget purposes to order. And the first, before we start, if the clerk could just ensure those that are on Zoom and that are here, just so we have.
Yes, I've already spoken with Councillor Woodward and Councillor Richter. They are
Great, all
available
the cameras
on
on.
Zoom.
Great, thank you. All right, so the first item is the adoption and receipt of the agenda items. Could I have a motion, please? Councillor Kunst, and second by Councillor Ferguson. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Thank you. We have a presentation by staff on the 2022 draft budget. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Backen to introduce the presentation, and we'll take it from there.
Thank you, Your Worship. As you stated, the journey continues. Today is really to address the flagged items from the previous meetings and any questions that may be outstanding or may result therefrom. So that's where we'll pick it up. After that, then Council may wish to discuss this, provide some direction, may wish to provide some parameters or some boundaries, and ultimately we're looking to advance this budget forward for public consultation. There's a big step from the presentation that Sandra has to going to the public consultation, and we're inviting council members to give any guidance or direction they may wish to see to help refine that. I think you'll see in Sandra's presentation at the end, she will again continue with the timeline we've tried to establish, but that is only a draft timeline. We can take additional time if that's needed, or we can stick to that. It really depends on the will of council. So with that, over to Sandra to pick up where we left off.
Thank you. So as Mr. Backen mentioned, we are here mostly with flagged items today, and we're looking for some direction on where to go from here, and possibly looking forward to public input. So we had two groups of flagged items. The first one was from the capital budget presentation day, which was January 17th. And there were 5 items that were flagged in that presentation, and a memo was on the distribution list on January 24th. So we will walk through those. The first one was pedestrian improvements on page 407 of the capital budget. The majority of this is from DCC. There was $1,250 that was unfunded from any other source. So it was an unfunded project. Do you want to talk about it? Anything?
If council has any questions, maybe we can go back to this one. So the unfunded total for this improvement is only $1,200?
Yes.
Okay. And do you need a motion of council if you wish to include that $1,250, or? Okay. Okay, I'm going to go to Councillor Long, and then perhaps would it be best to do the motions as we move through, or at the end? Probably as we move through. I'm getting the nod. Okay, so I'll turn it over to Councillor Long, and if he wishes to move that we fund the $1,250.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. Well, I think that would be pretty easy for me to do. $1,250, we could afford that. So I will move that. But I mean, there was also other discussion around it. This is at 5 Corners, right? There was talk about the development on the corner, but I imagine that maybe staff could clarify, you don't mind, Your Worship, that the developer, when and if they develop, would be contributing DCCs, which is going to help fund this. Is that right?
Not quite, Your Worship. Almost right. The extent of the requirements as far as the development application is concerned is limited to that which is fronting the development itself. So insofar as they will contribute towards the ECCs, yes, that part is correct. But to then say that it's directly attributable to this particular project, I think obviously it could be done so based on council's direction, but ordinarily DCCs coming in from any project would just go to the appropriate account, which is a reserve account for the class of work, i.e. roadworks versus drainage versus sanitary sewer versus water versus parks, and then kept in there until such time as we have a project identified by council that requires to be constructed, that then utilizes those funds from the larger bucket, if you will. So in this particular case, and one other thing, Your Worship, just to sort of clarify, all DCC projects, all projects being shown as being DCC funded, there is a caveat that I guess needs to be clarified. It's not perhaps explicitly stated, which is that is always subject to DCC funds being available. Because as a matter of legislative requirement, when a project is required to complete a piece of work that's been identified in the DCC program, then the township is required by law to apply DCC credits towards that project, which means that we don't always necessarily know ahead of time how much funds there may be available in the DCC account. And as such, whatever we put forward is subject to funds being available.
Well, thanks for that, Your Worship, but I understand that we're talking about a bucket that's getting chipped in by many different methods. But there must be a reason, Your Worship, because it can't be the $1,250 that's held up this project. So is it? Did I hear staff say that perhaps we should be waiting for the developer? Is that why it's been put down the list, or what is staff's feeling on this, Your Worship?
So just to be clear, the 1250 is the 1% that municipal portion that is required by legislation. So that's why it's outstanding. So perhaps, Mr. Seffi, just a little bit more clarification to understand this. So if we were to approve the unfunded portion, it still would require some time for the funds to become available. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Almost, Your Worship. Maybe I can just restate it this another way. The development application came and I guess a requirement beyond the frontage was not identified by staff or council as being a requirement of the application. Therefore, as part of the normal development application review process, a developer was not required to do off-site works beyond their normal frontage, which is a typical requirement.
Point of order. I understand that fully. I'm talking about just the section that is in front of them. Is that part of the problem we have here? That small section, right at the corner of 48th, the developer would be responsible for that. So would that come off this project?
Your Worship, the project is only for the portion which is beyond the frontage of the development.
Okay, yeah, all right.
It is not for the portion that is fronting. It's only the portion to the south.
Okay.
Mr. Seffi, would this be built independently of the development? So could we, or should this proceed concurrently with the development, even though we're funding it? Because that may be some time till the development occurs. Your Worship, generally when we have two projects next to each other, it makes a lot of sense economically, synergies, mobilization of contractors, etc., to do them together in conjunction with each other to avoid both the public disruption of two separate projects as well as the synergies, the cost efficiencies associated with doing them together. So while it can be done separately, it would be ideal to do them together.
So, okay, thanks.
So I still don't understand why this has been unfunded then. If it's not a matter of money, because it's only $1,250, why is it below? I mean, the only reason it's on the budget is because the council brought it forward. Is that right?
That's correct.
So I guess I'm curious to know what staff's feelings are. I guess in priority, they're thinking that perhaps this is not ready to go yet.
But Mr. Seffi, I think it comes down to timing. As you've indicated, it's best to be done at the same time. Do we know if the developer intends on undertaking their development this fiscal year, or is that potential that they may be delayed the reason why this didn't get above the line?
I think two separate questions there. We have no information leading us to believe that the developer is delaying or has been delayed. So our anticipation is that it will continue without the knowledge of the internal workings of a development application, that it will continue, and it could be as early as this year. That said, I think we'll have to go back to our Director of Finance in terms of, I guess, the accounting procedure for a 1% contribution towards something that's DCC funded, as to how it is typically funded and how we dealt with it in the past. I don't know.
So this was on the priority list as, I believe, a medium project. So we try to fund all the high and critical projects first. And so essentially we've run out of matching funding at this point for this project.
Thank
I'm
you.
just gonna hold off on here,
Yeah,
what
we'll
others
go
have to say.
through the
Thanks.
speakers. It sounds like this could just sit here and it'll still come back when development proceeds, and this would be funded at that time. So, Councillor Ferguson.
I think a lot's already been said, the 1250. I just wondered, from another funding source, is there anything in council contingency, or this all has to be engineering, if I may?
Well, the DCC portion would come from DCCs because it's
Right.
a DCC eligible project. So the other funding sources typically are contribution to capital. So yes, it could be a different funding source.
It just, as the mayor and Councillor Long have indicated, it seems like something we should be proceeding with. Now, if this was another 125,000, it'd be different, but it's the amount. Anyway, those are my points. Thank you.
And perhaps the motion could be worded, if we're going to do a motion, that this be funded and proceed once the developer proceeds. So it's done at the same time. So at least we're moving ahead with it, but we're waiting for it. Councillor Richter?
Yeah, it's my understanding that this is the sidewalk on the corner headed south from Five Corners where the empty lot is. Is that correct?
Mr. Seffi?
Your Worship, there was a map attached to the memo that Mrs. Ruff referenced earlier that was distributed to Council on June 24th. So to clarify, in response to Councillor Richter's question, the sidewalk that is the subject of the budget process does not front the development application, but rather starts where the southern boundary of the development application is, and then goes south from that property line, the southern property line of the development application, 247A Avenue.
Okay. My understanding is also that for whatever reason, that application on the corner has not and will not be proceeding. Is that correct?
Your Worship, that is not something that I'm aware of personally. I can check with staff and find out if there's been discussion with the applicant.
It's still
Well,
active.
it would seem to me that if we're going to wait for the developer to develop that corner, why would we rush ahead to do this? I'm not understanding exactly. I was under the impression that it was the sidewalk all the way down to the Five Corners that needed to be repaired. But you're saying, no, it's not down to the five corners. It's further south from the Five Corners?
Yes, it's not fronting that property that's being developed. It's the other portion, which I guess was not completed back in the day, or maybe different requirements back in the day. But this one is just the portion that's not in front of the property. Mr. Backman wants to speak.
Thank you, Your Worship. You're quite correct. This is south of that property, so it would be south of what was, I think, at one time the Porter property. It was a vacant lot on the corner. And to clarify, the challenge staff have with the relatively small amount was simply that it was a medium priority as opposed to a high priority. So it's kind of formulaic at that point. It just falls down the list because there may be other projects that take a small, modest amount that could still be proceeding. Having said that, however, council are the adjudicators of the policy issues and the importance, and as has been stated, this one is a bit unique in that it is a street frontage over the vacant lot to the area of the bus stop that's actually there. So that's a very good policy reason as to why this may want to be advanced. Having said that, then the ultimate timing for the advancement would be to be concurrently with the development, presuming that occurs. And I think your suggestion that if council wishes to pass a motion to fund this on policy basis, that it would be prudent that it occur concurrently with the actual development. Now, if that doesn't happen in a year, well, then we'll come back and flag that again. The other alternative is we do some sort of temporary sidewalk along the east side of 216th Street, just south of 48th, to allow it to try to get to the bus stop and then do the bus stop portion. But that would provide some redundancies in our services, and that we'd be putting something in we'd ultimately see taken out.
Okay, thank you.
You know, I was under the impression that the residents in the area felt this was an immediate priority. And what I think I'm hearing now is this might not be happening this year if we approve it. So why would we approve it if it's not going to happen? It's like we need to get an update from the persons that own and are developing that corner lot as to, are they intending to proceed this year? And can we get an answer to that?
Mrs. Suffy?
Yes, Your Worship, I can perhaps potentially respond to council prior to the end of this special meeting for budget purposes. I have made inquiries, and if I get the response, I'll report back to council.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to make another comment further to the opening comments that were made with regards to us sending this to the public. There are a number of items that are going to have budget impacts that are on our agenda today. And I don't think we should be sending anything to the public until we've resolved those items. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Woodward.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to move that we fund this project to run concurrently with the corner development.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Councilor Arneson seconds it.
I'll speak to that if I may, just to try to explain it a bit. Now that it's on the floor, yeah, this came forward from a couple of residents. I brought it to the budget process, of course, with a vote of council, but to run concurrently with the development to complete a portion of sidewalk in front of some single-family homes to connect Five Corners to a bus stop there. It was not intended to be done independently of that development. There's no expectation that it's going to be done, temporary interim basis or done separate from that development. So I'd like to have this as funded, and when the development proceeds, this project can be finished. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, it's been moved and seconded, so I'm going to call the question. All those in favor and opposed? If I can hear verbally, because I can't see everybody. Okay, it's carried unanimously. Thank you. All right, move on to the next slide.
The next one was the integration of climate change adaptation. So there were a couple of projects that were unfunded in our budget process. So that was the $50,000 stormwater general and the integration and climate change adaptation for $300,000.
Councilor Arneson.
Thank you, Worship. And through your Worship to staff, I'm looking at this and I see that $300,000 here, the integration and climate change adaptation, non-DCC, so it's unfunded at this time. So I'm wondering if staff could kind of respond to the idea that there are a lot of federal grants in particular, and perhaps provincial grants that are available in order to do matching funds, et cetera. I'm concerned that if we leave this, even though we have a robust climate action strategy, that if we leave this undone, that we would be not able to get any grant funding to help us with this. I think that this is a central component to what we're trying to achieve, and we need this baseline of integration and adaptation. So I'm wondering if staff could just respond to that. Thank you.
Duffy?
Thank you, Your Worship. I think Councillor Arneson said a lot of opportunities. I don't know if I could actually categorize them as a lot, but certainly there are numerous opportunities for external funding, and certainly to have the ability to leverage those funding opportunities with our share would help us be able to address a number of issues, including those related to climate action and stormwater management.
Yeah,
Another
go ahead.
follow-up
Yes, go
question?
ahead.
Thank you. What I would say about this is that I would like to include this for consideration to be funded, because if council will recall, when we first did our public engagement about our climate action strategy, there was a high degree, I think it was 78 or 79% of the public that was engaged, that was supportive of this. So I'm not sure if this could be broken out into some way into our budget consultation and engagement as we have in the past, but I really think it's important that we include this in here so we don't miss any opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask kind of a similar but different question that Councillor Arneson has asked. I mean, as we proceed into climate change initiatives, and looking at the programs that we've been discussing and the steps going forward, you know, mind you, a lot of municipalities have been held back a bit by COVID and the challenges thereof. I was wondering is, as we proceed into the year, you know, we're looking at the 2022 budget, would an opportunity come about for, as just the things that Councillor Arneson and others have discussed, about exploring what's available and then coming back to council and giving us some options of what we can do and finding the money accordingly? Now, obviously, right now it's 300,000, like a 0.25 or 0.33 tax increase or something. You know, and so that's what we're dealing with. The amount of tax increase. So if I may, through the chair, is there ever opportunities as things arise during our year, 2022?
Mr. Backen?
Thank you, Your Worship. I think the concept is certainly sound. The challenge is usually the timing and the scheduling. I think if we were to try to bring forward every grant opportunity to council, we'd be kind of overwhelmed by the broad nature of them. I think the format that's being suggested is that if we wish to include them in the budget, we can simply have the proviso that staff continue to seek grant funding for the initiatives, would probably achieve the same result in a more efficient manner. It's very much a challenge right now, as the government is actually announcing programs that may be short-term, they may cease, they may start again, and we're simply trying to use the resources we have to try to go for them all where we can, but where they fit into the priorities of council.
But you know, if I may, through the chair to Mr. Back, I mean, say this was 500 or 1.3 million, all that would have an impact on a percentage on our budget. Is that not correct? Even this amount has a significant impact on the budget, whether it's 300, 500, or $1 million, it has an impact. It depends on its funding source, and as I've understood it, the preference would be that this be funded from grant funding if available, but if not, that we would have to look at reserves and surplus, because I believe we're still operating under the cap that council's put in place, rough cap of 3%. So we'd have to find a way to try to fund that within that, and that would include, I guess, those sources, or looking at reprioritizing other projects as well. I think we're suspecting that if this was to advance, we would then come back from the public and say, well, here's what the public have said about our budget. And one option is we include this, we don't include this, we include something else, we don't include something else. So council would have a more fulsome picture then to make the decision ultimately in terms of what would be included in the budget. And to your point, I appreciate your comments. To your point, if I may, that if we proceed with something, if there's an if and then. So if we do this, then there's a tax increase or implementation increase. I guess all we're saying is this thing has been flagged. So we're not flagging, many other applications that are not being flagged. And so having said that, the opportunity to explore this flagged item for potential grants and other sources. That's my only point. Thank you.
Thanks. So, Mr. Backen, what you're suggesting is that there's a motion that staff to seek grant opportunities to fund the non-DCC or the non-DCC unfunded portion. So, if someone would like to make that motion, then it stays here, and staff have some direction. Councillor Arneson will move it. Is there a seconder? Councillor Ferguson? Seeing no discussion, I'll call the question. All those in favor and opposed? That carries unanimously. Thank you. Great. Let's move on to the next.
The next item that was flagged was around the stormwater detention pond in the Smith neighborhood plan. So this was on page 318. It was addressed in our budget process as having 4.95 available DCC funding, and $30 million was left as debt funding on that sheet.
Okay, great, thanks. Would that debt funding, would it be, the payments and interest be funded from future DCCs, is that, or is that
No, that was assumed to be general funding.
assumed to be general? Okay, thanks. Councilor Woodward.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my questions, Mr. Mayor. So just to confirm that's general. Right now, if we do nothing, I want to confirm that this will proceed, that we'll be seeing a budget bylaw for this amount this year. Sorry, a debt bylaw.
It would have to come back to council before that could proceed.
Yeah, so but what I was asking, whether you need a motion to take it out of the budget, so to speak, out of the current funding envelope for it to not proceed with, by default, without a lot more council discussion.
Yeah, so just to clarify, do we need a motion to remove this, or if we just let it lie, it doesn't go in? I don't know.
That's correct.
Yeah, so Mr. Backman, what would be the process? Just want to be clear.
Your worship, just a bit of a background. It could be taken out, or it could remain, but either way, council would have to be involved with whatever their process is, and I'll explain that briefly. This is for a site that would be ideally school board owned, township owned, and perhaps some private property owners. And it relates to the drainage for that, if there's to be advancement of the infrastructure in that area. One option is that we wait and have a developer try to do it, except that in my illustration, the developer wouldn't have the means to do it because there's a huge or a significant, I guess, public component being effectively a park and a school site. So then the question is, well, what happens without this? If this wasn't included, actually the development could still proceed. When I say the development, the institutional developments could still proceed, in that the park and school site could have on-site detention as short term. We don't particularly like that because it means there could be some redundancies and it could delay some of the enhancements to the fields and whatnot, but it's certainly an option. This project or these projects could advance independently. As it stands right now, then, what would the process be? If this is included in the budget, there's several steps that have to be continued, one of which is going to be property acquisition, and the other one is going to be ultimately the borrowing bylaws or bylaw for those properties. At this particular time, there's no properties under contract. So if this were to be included, this would be the signal to advance the project, but to return to council. If we exclude it, I think that would be interpreted to be that we should actually look at on-site detention for this, and that would mean that the ultimate drainage issues would be deferred until a later date, either pending our determination to participate, or a larger group of private property owners wishing to advance the project. The challenge we're going to look at, I think, is really one of timing and cost, and it's certainly a challenge, but it is something that can be managed either way.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a follow-up to that, Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to maybe let others speak, of course, but I'm leaning towards saying, pulling this out as a funded item through an MFA vehicle until some more research is done, some more time has passed. I'm hesitant to essentially endorse the funding model proposed for this. I'm also hesitant to endorse the price tag on this. I think there's some more work to do, at least from my end, to confirm how a detention pond has hit this amount, and in around what it's going to be used for, and ultimately who should be paying for it. So I would eventually like to move that we remove this and take out the MFA funding note on the budget, however you want to move that. But I would like that pulled out from the budget and not endorse it as part of a budget bylaw. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It would always come back at a future date if we did that. All right, I'll go through the list, then we'll come back. Councillor Ferguson?
I'm approaching it somewhat different than Councillor Woodward. He's out there. Okay, I heard what he said. I approach it. My question is, and I have asked staff, and I've got to be honest, it's a $35 million expenditure, and it's something that I'm somewhat confused about, knowing the details of what we have to do. do we have to do it in 2022? I mean, that's my very, very first question. Do we have to do it now, or can we just simply, detention ponds take a long time. Can we just, we own the land, can we just wait? If that's my first question. I know you said something, but you talk faster than I can think. But anyway, that's neither, regardless of that.
Mr. Backen.
Thank you, Your Worship. So a couple comments. We don't need to do it in 2022. Council determines the time frame if it needs to be done at all, because keep in mind there is the potential for on-site detention. It just means that we have some land that's not being utilized. The other component of this that makes it a bit of a challenge is that there are revenues that are recoverable ultimately from other parties. What I mean by that is that ordinarily we would ask for a developer to front end some of these expenses, and then they would seek recovery from those benefiting from those infrastructure items, such as the catchment area. So others in the catchment area would pay their proportionate share. We would still entertain doing that. The challenge here, of course, is that in my illustration, a significant section or portion of the property is going to be for a park. Another will be for a school site. Now, the school district properly would pay their share of the infrastructure for that. And another portion in the catchment area would be for a private development. They too would pay their share. The problem is that neither the private developer could afford nor could the school district advance history on this to actually procure this detention pond, and that's what this relates to. Really, it's acquisition of 5 or 6 acres, maybe 7 acres of detention pond for this area that would be put into place. So there is a recovery mechanism, but it becomes a borrowing then of the stormwater fund that has to be funded somehow if this advances. As was pointed out then, need this be done in 2022? No. The other developments could occur at a later date, and it could also be done on site, which just means that we would have some infrastructure that would have to be, I guess, remobilized when the ultimate solution is put into place.
So, Mr. Mayor, a supplemental question. I think Mr. Backen and I've actually discussed it with him and some of the engineers, because it is an awful lot of money, and it does affect our budget significantly, I imagine. I was just wondering if we could look at it for the maybe 2023 budget, and also look at options and alternatives to how we could do it. And the reason I was doing some thinking out loud, and of course I'm not an engineer, if you had 5 or 10,000 houses in an area, you would need a significant detention pond. But if you have a great big park of, acres and acres and acres, which you need the same size detention pond as 5 or 10,000 people. And that's the challenge I'm trying to work with, because it's a fairly large site. And that's why on-site drainage and looking at other engineering technologies and ideas might be something to explore because it's not necessarily needed now, but for the future. Anyway, that's where I'm coming from. Thank you.
Thanks. Councilor Whitmarsh?
Thanks, Your Worship. Just a couple of questions through maybe to Mr. Backen. What percentage of the 35 million would we expect to get back in sort of latecomer fees, either from institution there or from private? Like, would we get half of it back, or any idea of what that might be?
Just calculating, I would say very, very roughly 60%, maybe a bit more than that. It depends on a number of variables. And why it depends on those variables is the ultimate size of the park and the greenway and those elements that form part of it. But the basic concept is, and this what makes this area unique, is of the 50 or so acres, 50 to 60 acres in this area, roughly 17 are for the school site, 10 are for the park site, and then the remainder, 10, 27, maybe 20. Yeah, that's probably a bit high. Maybe it's 15 acres, 20 acres for the remainder. So it just gives you a range of what it would be. It'd be our proportionate share based on the actual size.
Okay, and I'm wondering, is this price of 35 million, is that a price that would, if we waited for a year or two or whatever, that this price would go up? I mean, I guess everything goes up, but do we expect, that this is a good time to do it now because this is the price, and as we charge latecomer fees, we would be able to gain back from some of that? Or if we wait a few years, are we now looking at $40 or $45 million?
That's really the question. The question is really based on land value. By far the most significant portion of this expense is for land acquisition, not the actual construction. Ponds are not insignificant, but I mean effectively it's earthworks and some culverting. This is by and large the land value. So one has to predict, is land value going to go up or will they go down? That's the challenge we're facing. All this provides is a range of certainty because we have not even contacted the property owners or even started the contractual negotiations for acquisition, but we know that historically and recently lands have been tending to be on the upward trend. So that would be the risk element. There's an equal body of thought that the land values may have peaked and go down, but we're not seeing that. But that's the other strategy that's often discussed.
Right. So when institutions or individuals come later to pay fees and pay their share, is that based on the value of the property that we purchased for land acquisition, or is that based on the value of the land when they come in to contribute their share?
It's based on the infrastructure cost. So when either a latecomers or a development works agreement is put into place, it's got a known cost associated with it, and they're paying their proportionate share, either based on acreage or units or density. The ultimate value of the properties, whether they go up or not, is not contemplated because it's actual known costs as they apply to the formula. So it's a reimbursement to the party that's advanced based on their actual costs.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Richter.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with Councillor Woodward, and I'll second his motion with regards to undertaking $35 million of new borrowing. That's a lot of money, and we haven't really discussed this. And to me, if this is about purchasing school sites, that's not our job to do, to pre-buy land for schools. And so I would like to have a more robust discussion about this, and I'd like this off our 2022 budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Arneson.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Well, I'm all for alternatives and options. I think this is a really good discussion today. I think personally, I've looked at this, not just this neighborhood, but potentially others as we go forward. I think we're actually getting to an economic tipping point where we're realizing that the costs of land, engineering costs, are not going to necessarily be able to meet in a financial equation what is going to be put on that site. So I'm just saying that as a segue to, I think if we're looking at other options and we're putting this off without any detriment to ourselves, we really need to start looking at green infrastructure. I have not seen anything yet in the Township of Langley, although there's been no political direction yet, no formal direction, to look at the nature of what would happen if you downloaded a lot of the stormwater management to the individual properties that we're developing there. So for one thing, there are many different ways that you can contain, absorb, and otherwise delay water than just putting in a big detention pond. So I personally think that this is something that we need to start directing ourselves towards, because in effect, especially for neighborhoods like this, with the land values being so high, and I would like to know what kind of, I'll call it apportionment, could then happen. So it wouldn't have to be front-end loaded by those who are seeking to, to be the first in and to get it repaid. It would be a substantive reduction to those costs because, in fact, the stormwater management would be taken care of in part by all of the different entities that were there and not just build a big detention pond, which I frankly feel increasingly is a very, very inefficient land use. So I would like to see a green infrastructure open and look at maybe the Smith neighborhood as a pilot project to see what that could look like, what could be accomplished, and what the price point would look like after that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Long.
Which I wonder if it would be helpful to have the slide up. I have found it on page 318 because I hear different discussions here. I heard about land purchases, I hear about school sites, but that's not what it says on page 318. It talks about the works for a 19,000 square meter capacity of, or cubic meters, I guess, of whatever it is, of water, trunk sewers and so forth in the Smith neighborhoods. And it talks about climate impacts and the flooding. Of course, flooding is very much on all our minds now with all these different events that have been occurring. It's a high priority, high 17. Maybe someone can explain what high 17 means. So it's always scary for me when council feels that they might know a bit more about it than staff does. And so if this is such a high priority for staff, if it's being funded by DCCs, it's being, I guess the interest on the loan would be also payable by DCCs. So in other words, there's no taxpayer per se. And then maybe further to, I know I've got a lot of questions in a row here, but further to what Councillor Whitmarsh was saying, when the latecomers come in, they will be contributing towards the interest as well, I suppose, on this loan. And certainly, if there is land purchase in here, that's not going to get any cheaper. So I think maybe we need a bit more of a presentation, because to me, this shows on page 318, and I don't know if you've been able to get the slide yet. Can we not all see the slide? Because I don't see anybody looking at the slide, except me, where it talks about climate impacts of not doing this project. It talks about climate change, and it talks about prevention of flooding due to increased precipitation, and it's a high 17 priority ranking from staff. So it sounds good that we're going to say, oh, let's save $30 million, but it doesn't sound like that's what staff wanted to do, because it seems like a very important project. And considering today's situation with flooding incidents and so forth, do we want to take that kind of chance? And if we're going to buy land, are we going to wait until the price goes up? Lots of questions there. Maybe we need to, those answered somehow, Your Worship, for me anyway.
So, Your Worship, I'm not sure we can pull up the slide from the main package. We can't. We can refer to it in paper form, and it's probably in your packages, so we have that. I think the discussion is this a school site? No, this is actually effectively a detention pond. So it is in an area that would be very close to a school site, a park site, and some other commercial development. The pond would service, yes, the school site, the park, and the other commercial development. And that's what makes it a bit unusual, and because it's such a large site as to both the park and the school site. The funding would be from DCCs, so it would effectively be borrowing from the Development Cost Charge Program, because there's not enough in the stormwater DCCs to pay for this. And that would mean that we would be looking for that fund to pay for the principal and interest charges that go along with that. Interest? No.
I think a portion of it is in the DCC program, but I
Okay.
don't know that all of it is in the DCC program.
What it says, it's got an asterisk right there. It says funded both DCC and debt.
Correct.
So that's, the asterisk then is because, that's right, thank you, that there's a portion that's DCC and there's a portion that's debt. That has to be funded by both DCC and debt, so it's the general fund. When it says debt, there's DCC borrowing, but we'd have to do an apportionment. This area is a bit complicated because as well there's the land that needs to be acquired, but a stretch of that land could be used for road, a stretch could be used for greenway, those sorts of elements. So there's some internal accounting we have to do, which is why the asterisk is there as to both the DCC stormwater and potentially for debt, could be road DCCs or potentially for the greenway that goes along with it. So it would have it would be primarily impactful of the DCC program, but not solely impactful of the DCC program. That's what the amount's referencing. The timing of it in terms of stormwater is that the theory is very basic, that the concept is that this area must ensure that pre-development flows are no greater than that the post-development flows are no greater than the pre-development flows, which is usually accomplished by retaining on site a quantity of water. In the case you've suggested, 19,000 cubic meters. So there's been some calculations done that would suggest that the change of topography from both commercial, parkland, and school would mean that there would be the need to retain on site about 19,000 cubic meters at the high point, and that would then flow out of the system as the capacity downstream allows it. That's where it's referencing the impact on stormwater, and then of course maintaining those is very important. As referenced previously, it would be possible to do some interim detention on the school site or the park site in the meantime as those matters progress. The build on those sites is probably going to be at least a couple years, 2 or 3 years. And we say that because, post land acquisition, there still has to be design of the facilities and then construction of the facilities. There has to be funding in place for those prior to their completion, but that gives us a bit of time in that process to work its way through. So yes, it's an important project, but the timing is not immediate. We're sensitive to the fact that this is a significant project in terms of dollar value, even though there would be significant contributions coming from the other parties, being the school district and the private sector property owners that would be benefiting from the ability to use the detention pond itself.
Thanks, Your Worship. Can you, Mr. Back, or the administrator, tell me what high 17 means then in the priority? Is there a list of 17 and this is on the bottom? Or is there 100 items and this is number 17?
I'll venture to guess, and Sandra can correct me, I think that's actually a number that references that it's in a non-priority sense. I think it's like number 17, but it's rated as a high priority. I think that's what it may be.
So we ask all of the divisions to rank all of their capital projects based on critical, high, medium, low. And then within each, they rank it also based on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay.
Right? So this was high priority, the 17th on the list of high.
And so how big is the list? 18?
Still?
Well, I guess, Your Worship, I'm really looking to staff to say, okay, if council wants to delay this, we're fine with it. But if they think that it's something that should go ahead, and if we see some flooding in that area in the future, or in the near future, or we are jeopardizing the lands with potential climate action that could cause some concern, then that would be my concern too. Thank you.
Mr. Backen?
Your Worship, we take the comments to heart. The challenge we face is, I guess, twofold. What are land values going to do going forward? Well, if we look back 5 years, they've gone up. If you look back 100 years, they've gone up and down, and we don't want to be predicting either way. So there's a risk element built into it. The second one is as to the stormwater management issue itself. As was referenced, it is a high priority, but that priority in part depends upon the actual improvements to the lands themselves. Remembering that stormwater detention really is generated by the development on the site itself. And in the situation we're looking at, I think that we would have to say safely that the school site, for example, there is no funding for the construction of the school at this point, and would likely occur at the earliest in 2023. So in that regard then, it is permissible to, I think, to say, well, we can actually get a better timeline and then address, make sure that that's addressed going forward when we have a better sense of that. Having said that, there's other components to it. I mean, our park there is something that the timing of which has not yet been discussed, and then there's also the commercial development. That's not our concern primarily, but it's something that would be impacted by this. It would need to be delayed until the storm waters are resolved. It may be possible for all three to do on-site detention. It may not be at this point. It's too early to tell. It's unfortunate that we're in the situation of having to be the project coordinator on this simply because of the land holdings and the scope and scale.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Davis.
Thank you very much. A really good subject. It is something that we have to, it's a lot of money. Okay, I see three issues here that Mr. Backen pointed out. Land values. Well, actually, maybe these are mine. Maybe I'll withdraw that. Maybe these are the three things that I see. Land values, issue of retention, and when does development come? Regardless if land values, we need to retain it when the development comes. I mean, we don't have the luxury like some municipalities. Well, look at Abbotsford. They made a new detention pond out of Sumas Lake, and it still was too small. So I know that's a bit cheeky, but it doesn't matter how many houses, how many developments go in there, we are going to reduce the retention, and we have to deal with that. And I don't know, sitting here, I know Councillor Woodward's had said, like, well, actually, I can't put words in his mouth either, but $35,000 may be pretty cheap. It may be way too expensive. It may be a lot of things. But one thing we did find out, we're getting more information here. Just in the last 10 minutes, we're getting a lot more. I'm getting a lot more information. So we have to retain the water. The only way I can retain water on my place is I tear down the beaver dam and let the water go. So somewhere along the line, by waiting here, I don't think, because by waiting, land values are probably going to go up. We don't want to wait a dilly-dally too much. We sure want to be able to retain the water, and it may be a really hard bullet to bite, but that's one that I feel is a responsibility of the township that sits, well, look at the flooding. It sits with the mayor's chair, and the mayor's chair sits at the council table. We have a real good staff. They've got to be able to retain the water. So that I'm not saying, hey, I'm easy when it comes to this. Like I'm easy when it comes to police safety for it. We need to retain the water, and there's lots of moving targets here. So keep working on it. Thank you.
Councillor Kunst.
So my question would be, is it possible to just, knowing that we're going to need the property, to split this up and say, let's buy the property and do the detention down the road, making that $35 million a little bit less and a little bit easier to manage, if we do this in a year or two?
Your Worship.
Your Worship, it is. The challenge is that most of the value you're seeing there is for the actual property themselves. Okay. Going by recollection, I think it's about 80 to 90% property values that we're dealing with here. The detention pond construction itself is significant, but it's not significant in terms of the land values that are, $5 million an acre that we're actually seeing. So, 15 acres or 10 acres, make a nice simple mathematical function. You can see 10 acres is worth, at $5 million an acre, be worth $50 million. That's what we're seeing in some of these challenges. So staging may occur naturally because there has to be the process of land acquisition for the pond itself. Maybe singular or plural. And the challenge with that is it may take quite a period of time for us to acquire those properties, because some may have to be negotiated or go to expropriation. We're not even certain at that point. We're getting well ahead of ourselves, because this is really just the direction with the envelope to proceed or to park it. And at this point, as was referenced, is if this was to be passed, it would be to proceed, but there'd be many times this would have to come back to council for the specific land acquisition or the borrowing.
Another question is, do we know at the time, the timetable for the schools that need to come on board because of population and development in Willoughby, or does this school only happen after that Smith plan is developed? And do we actually, okay, it's two questions. And do we need to retain the water now, or is it only after development or along with development? Because is there a water problem currently where we need to, I don't think that there is, but I'm just wondering if that's a problem now.
Your Worship, in reverse order, the requirement is that we retain the on-site enough water so that the post-development flow is no greater than the pre-development flow. Right now, we're in the pre-development stage, so that would have formally formed the benchmark, and I think there's always going to be water issues, but I think that we're really focusing on the transition from the pre to the post. So that would be the primary thing that we're looking at. In terms of the timing of the school itself, I think there's a distinction between the need and the location and the ability for it to be funded. I don't think the school itself schools are dependent upon the neighborhoods per se. They have catchment areas that are quite usually larger than the specific catchment area of a storm detention pond. Their catchment areas are usually going to be a multiple of neighborhoods, and in this area, the focus is on a secondary and middle school as being something that would be of value. So in that regard, then, it comes down to a question of the need. It's probably needed now. The timing and the rules the school board plays by, however, are that they must actually have the students before they can begin construction. I think they're very close to that now, but even if they had achieved that threshold, they still have to obtain the funding from the province. The funding generally from the province is available once a year. March 31st is their year end. So they would go through a planning process, and if it goes to the Treasury Board and Treasury Board approves it, it's usually done on a yearly basis by the March 31st deadline. Then they would have the ability to go ahead and construct. Right now, the pre-development funding of the school, I think, is in place. That's really their ability to do some very basic design work, but there is no funding available for the actual construction or for the finalized drawings and plans of the school board of the buildings itself. So that means that in all likelihood, if there was to be any funding, it would be in 2023. They'd receive that information, and then they would actually start the procurement process to tender and construct. So realistically, I think they'd be looking at 24 or 25 in a best case scenario. And why I say best case is they must weigh the I guess, needs of schools versus all the other provincial needs that may exist, which could be flooding damages was referenced in Sumas, or it could be repairs to the freeway system like the Coquihalla, where there's significant expenses. So those are the challenges that there's faced. So there's a great deal that's not known, and that unknown is going to make it difficult for us to predict when we're going to require the detention ponds to be fully operational to meet the post-development flows.
Okay, so I guess we're back to, is it wise to do this now, or would it be better to do it when the school has a little bit better handle on what they're doing? Like, because, I mean, if we have to do it anyway, I'm thinking we should just bite the bullet and get the land, and it's not going to get cheaper. But I guess that's for us to discuss and figure out.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Woodward.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to work with you here on how to word this motion, then I'll speak to the issue rather than speak again here. I would like to update the status of this project from inside to outside.
Okay. Yeah. So I think what happens, it doesn't go away, then staff continue to have it in front of them, and we'll bring it forward when it's necessary.
Yeah, and I'd like to speak to some of the comments too around timing and so on when the motion's on the floor.
Yeah, Mr. Backen has.
Your Worship, I wonder if this would accomplish it, that this matter be referred to the 2023 budget process as opposed to 2022. It would then come back naturally, but I'm not sure if that captures the intent.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Because it's still, it has to stay, on the book somewhere, so we can't just.
It would remain as an unfunded project, Mr. Mayor. So it would simply change the status on the capital sheet from inside to outside.
I'll second that.
Yeah, which I think does the same as.
Yes, it does, but there's a reason why I want to do it that way.
It really is.
There's a reason I want to do it
sure.
that way.
All right. You've made the motion. Councillor Richter seconded it. So I'll let you speak to it. I just want to clarify it. So it does the same as referring to the 2023 budget because it doesn't fall away. It's still there.
Not quite. So I would object to that characterization.
Okay. That's fine. I'm sorry. I was just clarifying with the our CEO, and I just wanted to ensure that's why I was asking the question.
I think Your Worship, I think the distinction is this would then be taken out of the budget envelope, at least for this year, and then it would be weighed again against the next priorities, but it's not being referred as an item to 2023, so it'd probably have less impact because it would be up to the council of the day to determine its ranking.
Good, thanks for that clarification. Okay, Councillor Woodward, go ahead.
Yeah, well, thank you, finally. Okay, so the reason I want to do it that way, I think I can speak to maybe near the end. I think it's going to make sense to speak to it a bit more. The challenge that I'm facing is a combination of some of the other comments from members of the council. But to me, there's a lot of conflation of different issues here. One is that whether the township of Langley is going to start building detention ponds is a major policy decision that hasn't been made. So I don't like I don't like doing that by simply endorsing that policy change within the context of a budget project of this magnitude. And then the second challenge is how it's funded if we do make the decision to do that. And I don't like endorsing a $30 million borrowing bylaw to build a piece of infrastructure that we're going to be paying interest on that loan facility potentially for 20 years, given how the recovery mechanism works. So I think that there's just a longer discussion that's needed. I don't want to necessarily defer it. Maybe that discussion can occur further when the bylaw is being debated at a council meeting coming up here in the next few council meetings, rather than officially deferring it away it can potentially be discussed further within the context of this budget. But I do think it should have the default of not being funded based on the magnitude of the decision. It shouldn't have the default position of being funded and endorsed to proceed, as Mr. Backen outlined. Leaving it as a funded item in the budget bylaw would be an endorsement to proceed on this basis, to start drafting bylaws, start acquiring land, bringing that to us, which of course we can vote down, but I don't want to do that. I would prefer that we engage in that policy discussion and give clear direction, not as Mayor Froese outlined, to just vote it down later because it'll have to come back more than one time. I would prefer it to be clear in what we're trying to achieve and why we're trying to achieve it. The other thing I'm wondering, as everybody here knows, it's on, some related items are potentially on the agenda later on today. I think those need to be discussed. The other thing is that around the timing Mr. Backen touched on, I do believe there's more time to proceed here based upon some of the comments I'll have later today, based on the fact that, Mr. Backen, maybe a couple of questions would illustrate it, how the funding mechanism works with the province. Right now the detention bond is not required until a school is under construction. We're not required to build the pond prior to construction commencing on the pool, if I may, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Backen?
Effectively, that's correct, Your Worship. The storm drainage issue must be resolved prior to completion of the construction process because it's post versus pre-development flows. So as part of the construction process, generally speaking, any issues can be resolved on site by some sort of interim detention.
Yeah, and from what we understand from publicly of the capital plan, the 5-year capital plan with the school district, as of right now, there's no contemplation of funding the complete project, being the construction of the school and completing the school itself, in addition to potentially acquiring land for that school.
Of the land, I think they have in this year's budget. The school itself, the construction would be in a subsequent year's budget that I think they're trying to get funding for in 2023, but that is certainly going to be dependent upon Treasury Board's decision as part of that budget cycle. Yeah,
so I think that it's good to clarify that for council, we don't have an approved school project here, which is a pretty significant one. And that's not being contemplated in this fiscal year. So if it's funded, hopefully, we all want this school built, if it's funded in the 2023 provincial fiscal year, I think Mr. Backen was touching on a 2025, maybe even a 2026 completion. So I don't sense the urgency to get into the detention pond business. I would prefer we take a more cautious approach to what is a major policy decision. I also have an issue of fairness on this. There's 3 detention ponds that are required to be built just in the Smith neighborhood plan alone. And if each of those is going to cost $35 million, we've got a major structural problem in what's occurring based on land value. So there's, to me, a lot more discussion that needs to be occurred here. I'm trying to be helpful, but I think that there's maybe some additional information that needs to come to council to help clarify how this process works with detention ponds. There seems to be some misunderstanding around that. And I think it would be great to have a longer discussion on this rather than proceeding with it as a funded project. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson.
Well, I actually was on the speakers list for prior to Councillor Woodward, sorry, Freudian slip, putting the motion in. So, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to just get a quick education in less than 30 seconds. There is something that we have promoted over the years called SMART. I'll ask Mr. Safey maybe to answer SMART growth, in which the case that we use environmental and green infrastructure systems to do the best we could for on-site drainage for residential and commercial areas. Is that still in effect, Mr. Safey?
Yes.
Okay, so I mean, we do have a green infrastructure, maybe not to the degree we were growing plants on trees, but it has been in place for a number of years where quite a bit of drainage can be withheld within a site. But that doesn't change the fact you have drainage from roads, from the weather, and from other sources. But when we put residents in, we do the best we can to control the storm water. Okay, now back to the motion. Perhaps it may seem the same but different to some folks. I see that council is unfettered by decisions for the future council. So if we put this to the 2023 budget, I see no challenge with the council of that day looking at it and saying, well, what are we going to do with this, and make decisions accordingly. We also are in the stormwater business. That's what business we're in. I don't know if that's ever going to change. We, municipalities and governments of all stripes are in the stormwater business, okay? How we fund it and how we control it, those are things we can sit down. To the specs and engineering speculations, those are things that we can review and go over, but we are in that business. How many and how it's put together, those are things. So if we want to take it out of the budget, fine, or refer it to 2023, fine, but we will eventually have to sit down and discuss this item. The reason why I'm spending so much time and spending so much staff time, it's an awful lot, it's a huge expenditure, and I don't think it's needed now. I love that word pre-development. That means the same as nothing's there. But anyway, there's nothing there right now, and I don't think we build the storm water first and then the school a couple of years later. I don't think that's our process, and I don't think anybody said that, but I wanted to clarify that. So whatever motion comes forward, I just think it's eventually, in my mind, should come off the table for now.
Thank you. Councillor Whitmarsh?
Yeah, I think, lots of good discussion here today and good thoughts from the council table. I think for me, I agree with Councillor Ferguson that we are in the stormwater business. We are coordinating this because of the incredible cost of it, and there's nobody else that can really coordinate this in the way that we can. So I think we are in that business. I am concerned about the price of land, and it seems at this table that when we've had opportunity to purchase land, we've made those decisions, and down the road, we've always been thankful that we've done that from a financial point of view. We have many examples in which the land increase has been beneficial to the council, and so I think we, do want to think about that. I recognize for sure that we don't need to have it developed in 2022, so I'd rather see the motion drive it towards, or move it, defer it, to have the motion defer it to the 2023 budget. It shows the importance of it. It allows the council of the day to consider and discuss it in the same way that this council is discussing it. I think that makes sense to me and demonstrates the importance of it and how much we value it. And we can continue to have presentations and discussions all the way to 2023, but at least it's in the budget for further discussion in 2023. So my thought would be that's the way we should be going.
Thank you. Councillor Woodward.
Yeah, well, I mean, a referral of the motion could certainly occur, but I mean, I think I just need to just jump in a little bit more and add a few more clarifications here. I thought I was clear. We are not in the detention pond construction business. We're not in the business of buying the land, taking the risk on recovery around latecomers and agreements. We haven't done that before, unless maybe I'll just get that confirmed, Mr. Mayor, from Mr. Packin. We have not done this before.
Mr. Seffi, is there any precedence? There's a lot of, I don't know, but specifically on detention ponds, has the township done this sort of thing before?
I can't recall, Your Worship. Certainly, the township has been involved in collaboration and partnership. I cannot recall an example of a specific facility that we have constructed. I may be proven wrong, but I'll have to, off the top of my head, I cannot recall any. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
That's great. So I appreciate that. So for the purposes of this discussion, I'll take that as a no, unless there's more information to come. I'm just trying to express some concern here. We are not in the detention pond construction business. Of course, it's turned over to the Township of Langley to operate and own, but I think that's a distinction maybe some on council just don't understand. So I think there's more information that needs to come to help inform this decision process. I would hope that people would want that information before making some of these comments. I mean, I think that there's a lot of risk associated with this at this per acre cost, the way latecomer fees work. the low densities that are on the table in the Smith neighborhood plan are somehow going to pay for what I'm learning now is over $100 million in detention pond infrastructure alone, potentially. There is some significant risk here that perhaps is not appreciated by some members of council. So again, I think having it there as a capital project to be discussed in 2023, I still think that referring it away means the discussion would not be occurring within the context of this budget. I still think maybe there's some discussion to do, but if people have made up their mind, they don't want to consider it in this council term, that would certainly give them lots of time to learn a bit more about it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, don't see any other discussion. Yeah, it's a good discussion, and yeah, if we haven't done it before, it doesn't prevent council from doing it in the future and building detention ponds, but that may not be the flavor of the day. I'm going to call the question on this motion. All those in favor? So, the motion. Okay, I'll get. You want the motion right out? Okay, no, there hasn't been. So, if the clerk could please read the motion out.
Thank you, Your Worship. The motion reads that the stormwater detention pond in the Smith neighborhood plan be left unfunded and moved to outside the budget envelope.
Okay, thank you. So that's the question. So, well, push your button or say something.
My amendment is we move that this particular item be presented to the 2023 budget and all the conditions and otherwise information be presented then.
Okay,
That'd
so
be my motion.
You're referring this motion to the 2023 budget?
Yes.
I don't know if we can do that. I'm going to get some clarification from the clerk because this motion is specific. I think it might need to be voted on first.
Your Worship, I think it would work if it was a referral of the item and then the motion that's Councillor Woodward has put forward. So you're referring the item and Councillor Woodward's motion to the 2023 budget.
That's what I'm doing.
Okay.
That's what I'm doing.
Thanks for that clarification. So
that's what I'm doing.
Councillor Ferguson moves that. Is there a seconder? Councillor Arneson seconds it. So on that referral, Councillor Richter.
I'm strongly opposed to referring it to the 2023 budget. The reason why I'm opposed is because the new council is going to be sworn in November. They're going to go immediately into budget preparations. Depending on what kind of a turnover we have on this council, they may not be in a fully up to current level of knowledge in order to handle this decision at the 2023 budget. I think what Councillor Woodward has proposed here is the most reasonable. If they are at the point where they can handle it, they can bring it back within the budget themselves. But as Councillor Woodward has pointed out very well, there are a lot of questions about this that have policy implications that we haven't even considered. Why on earth would we shove it down on a new council? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Woodward.
Yeah, thanks. No, I actually appreciate it. So let's get this done. If there are 5 members of council that don't want to consider this project further, want to refer it to 2023, then I don't have to spend more time on it as part of this budget process. So I would certainly appreciate that. There's a clear direction to no longer consider this as part of this budget. But I don't support a referral. I think the way I've done it allows for that discussion to continue within this budget process. There's another month or so to go on that. If this is referred away, would certainly be final, that this council won't consider it, but I would like to continue to at least consider it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Davis.
Question through to Mr. Backham. It is definitely, if this budget, if I vote to move, or if we vote to move it, to removing it, is it going to stay the same? Will it come back in 23 on the paper as presented to us the way it's presented right now, or will it be changed somewhat? That's kind of looking in a crystal ball.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we need to plan ahead. It wasn't raining when Noah built an ark. So what can we do? Like, I don't want to not vote against it, but I do want it to come back up on the 2023. So what guarantees, so I guess, with this amendment putting in here, it confused me. I want it to come back on 2023. Mayor Feroz, maybe you can help me out. So the amendment means that, what does the amendment actually mean?
This isn't an amendment, it's a motion to refer this item and Councillor Woodward's motion to the 2023 budget process. So
Well, what was Councillor Ferguson's then?
that's what it is. It's a referral. This is the referral motion.
To refer it the way it is?
To
So would that, Mr. Backham, is that the way you'd like to see the,
I think it's, I don't know if Mr. Beck can answer, but maybe it'll help with a little context around the workings of this type of a motion or type of a project, I should say.
Thank you, Your Worship. I can really only address the process at this point. So there was a motion on the floor that was to remove this item from being funded in 2022. What that means for us is then that we would not be funding that in 2022, but we would continue to work towards the initiative, generally speaking, and if it ranked high enough, which I suspect it would be funded, it would be popping up again in 2023. And there may be other intervening events that come along that suggest that we should do something. For example, there's a tremendous land sale or something that we just think is really something we cannot function with. So that's the first part. The second part is then that the matter, being the slide before you, and then the motion to remove it was referred to the 2023 budget process. That would then suggest that it's being dealt with as part of 2023. We would have some of the same rules apply, but it wouldn't be something that would be an active matter because it would be outside our 2022 budget process. It would be dealt with in 2023 as an item referred to council. Referred by council to council at that time. As you may recall, in our budget process, we have items referred by council.
Yeah.
So then that item would then be referred and would be picked up at that point where we had left off.
Okay, so we're not taking the ball out of play. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Whitmarsh?
Thank you. Well, I'm a little bit confused, to be honest. I think when I understood that when Councillor Woodward's motion was to take it from being funded to being unfunded and therefore would not be part of the 2022 budget discussion. And so that to me just automatically means it's moved to the 2023 or later. But then I thought I heard Councillor Woodward suggest that no, we'd actually continue to discuss it as part of the 2022 budget process. So I'm a little bit confused. I'd like to continue discussing it, certainly. I don't want to see it being considered any later than 2023. In fact, I'm even open to considering in 2022 budget, but I don't want any later than 2023. So I'm trying to get clarity because they both seem the same thing to me. One seems to say it's unfunded and we won't do it in 2022, and the other one says, well, let's just not talk about it until we get to 2023, but it will remain funded. So to me, this is all very confusing. I don't know if I'm the only one that's confused, but
It's the minutia of the motions.
I'm confused on if it's part of the 2022 budget or not. Both motions seem to suggest that it both be considered in 2023.
With a slight difference, but Mr. Back.
Thank you, Your Worship. It is a fine point, but I think I would consider it this way. Traditionally, when a matter is referred, it is usually not further processed during the time of the referral until it's considered by council. That's a general statement, but I think it would probably describe this circumstance. I think what's being suggested here with the item being removed from the funding envelope, if you will, is that it would still be in the part of the 2022 budget, but would not be funded. Therefore, in theory, there could be further discussion between now and the conclusion of the 2022 budget process. That discussion, I suppose, in theory, could say there's been a material change. We should put it back in. It could be a result of public input that this is an important topic. It should be put back in, or perhaps it's something else. It's public input that this is a policy issue that we should not be delving into, so maybe we should never be part of this and it would be adjudicated upon further. So I think the distinction is that while items that are not funded are not advanced as part of the budget bylaw, they remain part of the discussion, theoretically at least, whereas a referral, generally speaking, would mean it's simply pushed down to the next event, which in the description was the 2023 budget process.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Long.
Yeah, well, I think this, it's a strange discussion, because when we flag something, aren't we supposed to just get some explanation from staff as to why it's there? Instead, we've got all this discussion occurring, which is confused, I think, creating our own confusion. To me, if you pay me now or pay me later, it's going to be a lot more expensive next year. Every week it's going to go up, whatever, if you're buying land. This is something that has got a green initiative attached to it in capital letters. I don't think we should be, my favorite term, playing mucky-mucky with it. If the staff have got it here as a high priority, whether we do it this year or next year, the difference is simply going to be it's going to cost more next time. So let's just get on with it. I'm going to vote against all of these ideas and see what happens there. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so on this referral, I'm going to call the question.
Oh, sorry. Referral, did you say, or deferral?
It's a, yeah, this is Councillor Ferguson's referral, so it's referring the item and also Councillor Woodward's motion to the 2023 budget.
Thank you.
That's what we're voting on now. Okay, so I'm going to call the question. All those in favor and opposed? Okay, I have Councillor Arneson, Councillor Whitmarsh, Councillor Kunst, Councillor Long, and I can't see anybody else because my screen is limited. Is anybody else opposed?
Councillor Woodward is opposed.
Councillor Woodward is opposed. Anybody else?
Councillor Richter
Councillor
is opposed.
Davis is opposed and Councillor Richter is opposed. Okay, the motion then fails. Okay, so we're back to the first motion that Councillor Woodward had put forward, and I'm going to try and find that speakers list. If the clerk could read that one out again, just so we're clear where we are.
Thank you, Your Worship. The motion reads that the stormwater detention pond in Smith Neighborhood Plan be left unfunded and moved to outside the budget envelope.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to call the question on that one. So all those in favor and opposed. So if I Councillor Whitmarsh, Councillor Long, Councillor Davis, anybody else opposed? And that carries. Okay, so now we move on to the next item.
The next item was the improvements on 24th Avenue between 196 and 200th Street, and I think this is actually made up of two capital projects. One which is put forward in this year's budget for DCC funding for $4 million, and the 1% assist is out of the contribution to capital. And the other project, which is on page 303, is a carry forward project.
Is there any discussion? Councillor Woodward.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I think I also would like to make the same motion on this one. I would like to update this project to be outside the funding envelope.
Okay, is there a seconder?
I'll second that.
Councillor Richter seconds. Councillor Woodward, did you wish to speak to that?
No, I don't need to. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll call the question. All those in favor and opposed? I got Councillor Whitmarsh, Councillor Kunst, Councillor Long, Councillor Davis, and I'll be opposed. So that fails. So the motion fails, and we're back to this. Are there any questions on this one? Okay, we can move on to the next one.
The next item is the 208th Street corridor. So this is comprised of three projects, those found on page 422, 401, and 398. The one on 422 is carry forward budget, and the other two are DCC funded, and the non-DCC portion is unfunded.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion on this? And now this one is, I don't have the report just to jog my memory, this one's above or below the line? These items.
So the DCC portion is not funded, so
Okay.
it is a significant portion of the project.
Okay, so it can't proceed unless it's funded, okay. I don't see any questions on this one, so we can move on.
Okay, so that was all of the capital items that were flagged. We'll move on to the January 24th budget, which was the operating budget. And there were quite a number of items on this one, so we'll walk through them.
Okay.
The first item would be the addition of 6 firefighters, which is a service enhancement. It was presented as a discretionary item.
Okay, so just some clarification. So these items that we have listed now, if you can go back to the previous slide, just Thank you. So these items were flagged for discussion during the budget process. So we can go through each one. And have you included in your, I know in the final there's a bit of a synopsis on the budget, on the percentage increase. Are these all included? So now we would need a motion to take them out, or do we need a motion to put them in? If council's happy with it, as we move through each item, do you require a motion to put it in, or does that come at the end if we approve what you've put forward?
Some of them have budget implications, and some of them were for further clarification, I believe, so.
Oh, okay. If you could flag the ones as we move through that would
They
require
are
a motion.
currently in. Again, like, the firefighters are in discretionary, some of them are maybe in base as well.
Okay, I'm a little bit lost there. So if we need a motion to amend the budget to include things or to remove them, that would be good. If it's already in your, I don't have the presentation in front of me, to move forward to where there's a motion of council, either we are going to continue discussing it another date or we're going to move it forward. I just want to know if we need, process-wise, do I need to stop and have a motion on each one, or is it already included?
So, Your Worship, I think the answer is it depends. For example, the 6 firefighters, I believe they've been included
Yes.
in the budget. Whereas one of the questions is the admin pool car, what is it? So that would be included and would need a bit of an explanation and likely would have to be removed. So I think we can touch upon each one and say it's in, or it needs to be put in.
So that's great, thanks. So what we'll do is we'll go through each one. If a member of council wishes to remove it, then it would be a motion at this point. And then when we get to the end, we'll assume that they're all in. But if a member of council wants it removed or changed or amended, as we go through each item, that's the time to do it. Would that make sense to you, Ms. Ruff?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so that's great. Councilor Long, you had a question?
Yeah. So I just want to be absolutely clear, Your Worship, because it's a good point to raise. So if there is no motion to remove it, and there's no more discussion, we move to the next item, it means it stayed in.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Yes, that's correct. Thank you. Okay. Now that we got that
Sorry.
cleared up, we can move forward. And you can discuss. If I don't see any hands go up, then we'll just move to the next one.
Okay, so this one was brought up. It is in for half the year in this year, and that is $273,000 for additional firefighters.
Okay. Thank you. I don't see any questions.
The next item was just a clarification. We had the incorrect, or not the final item, that this had to, it refers to the professional consultant familiar with environmental issues, and we did not have the updated resolution, so we've just added the updated resolution to all of our published materials.
Okay, thank you. Okay, move forward.
This one was an item that was added late in the budget process, and it added the 0.03 to our current budget, so it is in the budget at 3.03%. $50,000 was added to the base budget for 5 years for the social sustainability strategy. And the report talked about the fact that it will be $1 million in total, approximately, and this will cover off $250,000 of that. The remainder should be from grants.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Richter has a question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to, I note that our budget, which started out at 3%, which was a good thing, is now at 3.03. So is it this one item that's taking it up to the 0.03?
Yes, this is the item.
So this is an add-on to the existing budget?
Yes, it was a late addition.
Late addition. Okay, thank you.
Okay, that's all the questions. Thank you.
The next item was just a general query about service levels and impacts on the budget. So some of I think we talked about it in the budget presentation, but some of the things that we looked at when we were trying to get to the 3% was back on the discussions we had last year in the budget prep sessions, and that was around maintaining service levels, reviewing cost recovery, using inflationary increases in fees, looking for grants, use of surpluses where they were available. And on the capital side was capital requests to be reviewed and prioritized, reviewing debt options, using a temporary reduction in transfer to reserves, and also rationalizing all new positions.
Thank you.
There was a question around RCMP staffing levels and the admin pool car. There was a memo that went into distribution last week that discussed the staffing vacancies. There are currently staffing vacancies in RCMP due to leaves. Other than that, we have full complement. And then the administration pool vehicle was also in there, question around what it was to be used for. And it's for admin duties, and there's funding from that through our reserve and a share with the city.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. Councillor Richter?
Yeah, so if we took the admin pool vehicle out, would that, because that's 60,000, would that bring our budget back to the 3% instead of 3.03?
I think the impact is the 7,200, not the 60. Is that as a cost? So it would be $7,200 less if we took this out to this budget.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so it's not going to make a material difference then. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Whitmarsh?
Yeah, just for clarification, the leaves that we're experiencing in the RCMP, though they were funded outside of the township. Are they like provincially or federally funded, or how are leaves funded?
Your worship, just to describe, so what the slide refers to is that the full complement is here, in that bodies have been allocated, but the bodies may not be able to work. They may not be able to work because of illness, injury, child rearing leave. In those instances, the federal government, as I understand it, pays for those, and that means that we don't locally pay for them. But so the position is there, but if the person comes off the leave, then of course we resume paying for it. And in that situation, that's why there is these vacancies, or why there's a surplus, because sometimes when we have budgeted for them, but the people aren't able to work, they're on the sick leave program of the RCMP, in which case we would then have the surplus in terms until they return.
Right, okay, and so when someone takes a leave, I mean, I guess there's short-term and longer-term leaves, but when someone takes a leave, is there a mechanism to have replacement officers come in to replace them during their leave so that we can function at our full complement?
There are mechanisms, but they can be somewhat complicated. So if it's a long-term leave, a severe injury where there's a known time frame, they can look at an interim posting, but it must be just like in our situation. They would then be attracting people for the interim posting, not for the permanent posting. So you'd be looking effectively at people coming out of depot as an interim maneuver. We're in a situation, however, where there's an oversubscription for depot, so it's going to be very hard to fill some of those vacancies on an interim basis. But if there is a municipality near us that all of a sudden generates a lot of surplus RCMP because they go to a private force, that may impact the equilibrium point, and there may be more people then available, because those senior people would take other positions, and that would free up some of the folks coming from depot.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Ferguson?
Yeah, I'm going to ask Councillor Richter's question a different way. Now, I know there's capital, there's operational, there's the 7,200 operational. What if we took the whole vehicle out? What impact would that have on the budget?
It's still just limited to the operating impact of 7,200 on
So
our
the
operating budget.
The capital comes out of a administrative pool vehicle reserve, is that what it's called? Pool vehicle reserve? It's the same like the guys in the fire department have, they buy $1 million trucks, but we have a reserve for that.
It's coming out of the general RCMP reserve.
So, but that wouldn't have any impact on the budget?
No.
Say we took $1 million out of there, would have any impact on the budget?
No, the money is there. It's in the reserve, so, and it's used for capital.
How much money is there?
Well, I think we got that last time. It's a couple $1 million or $3-4.
So just to give a bit of a
I
description.
mean, we were talking last time meeting, $90. So here I'm talking about $1 million.
So I think it's all understanding how the system would work. So what transpires is if there's, it's called the Equipment and Vehicle Reserve. Each operating division contributes money towards that reserve to replenish it as it goes up, and that's how the vehicles are replaced. So that reserve then, if it's in place, would mean that there is in your example, a saving of $60,000. That would not impact the tax rate. That would simply impact the amount of money in the reserve, if you will, like a form of surplus. what impacts the tax rate is the amount of money we have to then budget or pay for each year to maintain and operate that vehicle. So in this example, it's $7,200. Just a brief caution, though, when they say administrative pool vehicle, they really should be saying something like court services or victim services worker, because these are the vehicles that are used when they have to respond to court calls or respond to victim services matters where there's been a tragic incident and they need to appear on site. They can't go in the Rcmp vehicles because, of course, those are emergency, and they cannot be required to take their own vehicles for personal safety reasons, hence why they use the municipal vehicles. And this would be the third vehicle, I guess, to actually put into place at any given moment.
And Ms. Ruff, can you clarify the actual reserve that's coming out? Because I just saw that it's coming out of the City of Langley Police Reserve.
No, it's coming out of our RCMP reserve, and then
Okay.
we share the cost.
Share the
because
cost
we
with
have
them,
to
okay.
Share.
That's
Okay,
fine.
that helped. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Long?
Okay, so let's be clear on that, because I have a page, the page here, 251, it says other City of Langley, and so you're saying RCMP, so the city's actually paying for part of this vehicle too then?
Correct.
The 60 grand is going to be split between us and the city,
Correct.
and the 7,200 is our portion of the maintenance of it.
The operating
Yeah,
costs.
and as it says on the budget sheet, we have over 300 members. I don't know if that includes staff, township staff or not, 300 plus staff, or roughly 300 people that need to get around, like Mr. Backen has said, if they have to go somewhere, they can't take a patrol car. So considering that amount of staff and usage, 300 people, 2 vehicles isn't cutting it apparently. So I think if the city's helping to pay for it, that's not a bad idea. So I think we should just leave it where it is.
Yeah, so the capital contribution is shared by the city and the township. The operating is the township of Langley, but then we charge back to the city for operating. So the 7,200 would be the total operating cost of that vehicle, but we also have a charge back to the city for a certain percentage for operating costs. Is that fair to say?
That should be our portion, the
Okay,
7,200.
okay, that's our portion. They pay it above that. Okay, great,
Yeah,
thanks.
so I'm supporting leaving it
Yeah.
where it is.
Councillor Richter?
Yeah, just this business of sharing with the city. Are those vehicles used more for the township than the city, or is it 50-50? Like, what's the cost share?
We share our RCMP detachment, so all the costs related, we have to share with the city.
So is it a 50-50 split? Are they putting 50% in?
No, there's a formula
There's a formula we use to share costs.
Yeah.
based on population.
Okay, so you're following the formula.
We follow the formula.
Now, is the actual usage reflective of the formula? I guess what I'm asking is, are we purchasing this vehicle using a formula, but it's going to be used more for Langley City calls than it is for Langley Township calls?
I think it's a difficult question to answer. It's used for the detachment based on historical trends and usage based on the formula, which is, let's say for argument's sake, 75% township, 25% city, and argument's sake is 75% overall over a number of years goes to the township and 25 to the city. And if that changed, then the formula would change. I think it's reviewed periodically. So, on one particular month, maybe it's used a little bit more for the city, but then the next month it's used proportionately more for the township. So it's difficult to pull that number out, but the formula is there and it's reviewed periodically. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So
When was the last time it was reviewed?
We recalculate the percentage annually.
Annually?
Yeah.
Okay. But we're not looking necessarily at usage, or we are when we recalculate?
It's based on a set formula, which does not have to do with this particular vehicle. It's for all a number of different costs that we share with the detachment.
Okay, thank you.
thank you. Okay, I think we move on to the next one.
The next one was just to take out the Alder Grove Plaza item. So we took out $8,951 out of our operating impact.
Okay. Thank you.
And then there was another question around the discretionary staffing requests and to separate out the other expenses. So we have done that on this slide. And there were included in the package also the descriptions of each discretionary person requested.
Okay, thank you.
One of the last items was to meet the objective of 3%, and at this point, 3.03%. We would have to have a reduction in capital or a reduction in the budget at some point of about 501,000, because otherwise we'd be at 3.37.
So just to stop right here, so with this slide, the final slide is 3.03, so we would need a motion then to remove the contribution to capital, and that would, one way is to increase the tax to 3.37, so that 3.4 we'd be putting back in. Is that correct, Mr. Backton?
Very close, Your Worship. The question, I think, was asked in terms of, well, if we wanted to keep the $500,000 contribution to capital, what could be done? Well, or what would be the follow-up from that? Well, it would be a 3.37, because we'd add back in 3.34%. So, in fact, if we were going to go down this path, we would actually have to have a motion to maintain the contribution to capital and take to the public the 3.37. Otherwise, it'll remain at the 3.03.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Richter?
Yeah, just coming back to the 0.03, how would this number have to change in order to bring it from 0.03 down to 0.0?
That change was $50,000.
Would increase the contribution to capital by 50, is that?
So we'd have to reduce contribution to capital by $551,000.
Yeah, okay. I see.
$551,000. Okay, I'd like to make that motion, please.
Okay. Is there a seconder to that? And you have to voice it because the screen's always hidden. I'll get it up.
I'll second that, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Councillor Woodward seconds it, so it's on the floor.
Okay, I'd like to speak to it just from the point of view that 3.03 is still above 3.0, and 3.0 was the direction that council gave in July. So I'm thinking to maintain consistency with the previous direction given. If we do this, we can bring it down to 3.0.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ferguson.
Yes, thank you. We have been talking for the longest time about the 3.03. When I talk to staff, when I talk to other members of council, when I talk to the phone or pieces of paper, 3.03 is a number that keeps coming up, and I think I read in the paper, they're looking 3%. I think that's something that I can live with. I would hope that that's something that all of council can live with. I'm a big believer that it would be great to have a unanimous council on this budget. With COVID, with the number of challenges we've had, the list goes on and on and on. I'm a huge supporter of contribution to capital, but this one time I think it's important. It's more important to move forward with something that we've already voted on once and presented once. I can certainly live with the 3.03. Those are my points, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I don't see any further discussion, so I'll call the question. Councillor Woodward. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Sorry about the late thing. I can also live with 3.03, but I'm going to support this because I view it as a late addition for the other item, which I think is important as well for living up to the previous direction in a COVID year. So actually what we're not doing is we're not increasing the reduction of contribution of capital. Actually, we've decided to fund the other item instead. So unless we're going to examine the other item and look at its merits versus contribution to capital, I'm going to support this. I haven't had a chance to actually look at what that item is. I'll trust that it's a good recommendation for the amount of money that it is. Don't know if I have to scrutinize it to that degree, that particular item. But I also think that it's important to deliver a strong message around 3%. But I can also live with 3.03, but I'll be supporting this because I don't recall a discussion about adding that other item similar to the discussion we're having right now. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Richter.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. I was under the impression from earlier questions that I asked that the 0.03 was coming from the social sustainability policy that we adopted.
That's correct.
That's correct. Okay, so this just offsets that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor?
I'm in favor.
Opposed? Okay, I got Councillor Kuntz, Councillor Arneson, Councillor Long opposed, so it carries. Okay, so I think we can move on then. Thank you. Yeah, or did the votes, just to clarify, the ones who are opposed, can you read them out again? Just make sure I got it right. I got Councillor Kuntz, Councillor Long, Councillor Arneson. Was anybody else opposed? No, okay.
Just the three.
It carries. Just the three, thanks. Okay, carries. All right, move on to election costs. Well, that's quite an increase over the last time.
There was a question around election costs and some funding questions. So we are funding $295,710 out of the election reserve. And then we have a one-time funding of $215 for the total cost of $511,000. Our previous election was $289,000, but there's been significant increases.
Thank you. I've got some questions here. Councillor Woodward?
Yeah, thanks. So it's good to get this clarified. I had a question about the mechanics. Maybe I'll learn something here. That money was in the was in the reserve summary of 2020. And then in the draft reserve, or not a current status reserve summary of 2021, that money was gone. So was that spent? And I'd like to be curious, how is it withdrawn from the reserve prior to the election bylaw and the budget being approved?
The schedule contemplates the spending that we are undertaking in this budget. So it was removed because it's being moved into the operating budget in this current year.
Okay, so and I think I'll follow up separately to find out how. I mean, I'd like to understand how an election costs that amount of money, given the increase. I just like to understand it, and if we need to start putting 100,000 per year. So I just wanted to ask Mr. Backen if he's got it in one of his lists somewhere to look at. We're going to start putting away 100 or 125,000 per year starting in 2023 to cover this in the future.
Yeah, I can answer that. I read it. I didn't read everything on in this budget.
I'd just like to get it confirmed from the public, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I did read that, and it is contemplated that'll go in each year. 122,000.
That's great. I think it's important. Sometimes these questions are for the public as well as members of council who maybe haven't read it. So I appreciate you helping me out there. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, no problem. I actually read that report, but not everyone, but that one. All right, who have we got next? Councillor Whitmarsh.
Yeah, just for clarification again, the increase of 221, how much of that is due to us moving, including mail-in ballot as an option?
Your Worship, I think Ms. Bauer is online, so she can actually give a rough outline in terms of the election machines, their additional costs, the change in the minimum wage we've incurred, and as well the mail-in ballots. She could probably give some high-level summaries as to those.
Go. Sorry, I was just having a moment. The election costs have been driven by several things. To answer the question on the mail-in ballot, roughly I estimate that's $40,000 to $45,000 after it's all said and done. The costs included in that are also the time or the software we need to update in order to include the mail-in ballot. There's also a mail-in package actually includes several portions. So there's multiple envelopes and the ballots as well that have to go out and come back in. And plus there's a significant amount of administration time to deal with them. The employee funding, I did take quite a bit of an increase this year, partially due to the fact that the minimum wage in BC has come up so much or so drastically over the last few years. When I calculated out the totals, it looked as though we were going to be paying some of our employees less than minimum wage for their service for us. So it has not been increased since 2012, I believe is the year. So it is time that we should increase our payment in order to both pay people fairly and keep up with the other jurisdictions near us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Arneson.
Yes, thank you, Worship. And I guess through Ms. Bauer, or sorry, through your Worship to Ms. Bauer, I did some research about this. This is a really astonishing kind of cost here, and I'm not debating whether or not we need to pay these costs. Obviously, we have election every 4 years, and we have to pay the cost of what happens, and with inflation, machines, etc. But I would like to know to what degree I believe that there is some kind of reference to what other communities have done, because I found, for example, the city of Burnaby and the city of New Westminster actually had a defined policy based on what discussion happened. And there are a number of different ways, for example, to deliver mail-in ballots, and some of them are more expensive than others. And so I'm wondering, I know that this is an informational item and we have to vote on it, but later on today we're going to be talking about this, and I would like to know what kind of breakout we have for those kind of costs. For example, one community in a prior election had somebody asking for all sorts of ballots on behalf of other individuals. So there was a person who was saying, well, send me 20 ballots. And that was, apparently part of their protocol. So they did that, and maybe one came back as a result. So I would like to have more defined terms about what it is that we're anticipating doing here, because I think if we're going to take that next step, and I am favorable to that for people that find it challenging to participate because of maybe COVID concerns or accessibility, there are a number of reasons, but I do think that we owe it to ourselves to have a more defined policy around what that's going to look like. And the other question I had, well, this is actually a question, does this account for internal staff time? Because there's going to be people asking a lot of questions about this. And would that fall to the employees that are doing this on our behalf, or would this just be relegated to people that are already doing administrative tasks? Thank you.
Through the mayor to Councillor Arneson. At this time, I don't believe it's going to take any staff time at all. We've allocated one staff member to help organize the supplies. The questions that come from people that are running or people that have questions about the election process will all be going through our chief election officer or a deputy chief election officer. In the past, legislative services have been involved in the election. This time, we're not involved hands-on like that. It would all be through the election staff. And as for the mail-in ballots, if we do the same process we used in the previous school board election, we will be having people who apply for the ballots have to include their identification at that time. So if you want to if you like to request a ballot, you have to send in your identification, which we did using people's cell phones. So they took a picture of their ID, that was sent in, and that's when the ballot got sent out. So you won't be able to request multiple ballots for a bunch of people.
Sorry, just one follow-up question then, because another community had the issue of requiring people to come and pick up their ballots. So what you're suggesting is that once it's verified, this person should be entitled to a ballot, and we send it out, because, that's another cost, rather than getting them to pick it up. But you're saying we're going to do the former.
At this time, we are intending to mail them as we did in the last election. It was, again, just to cut down on people having to come in, or it will be up to the chief election officer to write the procedures at that time. We could change to that, but we found mailing them out worked as well.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson?
Yeah, I just wanted to know, did Councillor Arneson want this item flagged?
It is flagged.
Yes, or
she's had questions
because you
on
asked
it.
like a lot of questions about the breakdown, and I'm not sure if all those questions were answered, and I just wanted it flagged. Okay, my only point was that here we are moving into an increase, and is there shared cost with? I think we have another school district, if I may. Wendy, are you there? Or?
Through the mayor to Councillor Ferguson. The shared cost with the school board has always been to share they provide the election locations on the day. So they provide the staffing to open the schools and close the schools and provide us the space, the heat, and everything else we needed, including the conductivity of the Wi-Fi.
Okay, but we use some of our facilities as well. Are we using less or more of the schools?
For general election day, with the exception of one or two locations, it is all done in the schools.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Richter?
Hello?
Hello, we got you. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't hear you give me the floor,
Oh, yeah,
Mr.
sorry,
Mayor.
yeah, I did say Councilor Richter. Yeah, okay.
Okay.
One of those things.
So the 221,000 less the 45,000 means we're putting 176,000, almost 900 in additional salary costs. Like that's almost 60% higher. What are we paying per hour?
Ms.
Through the
Barr.
mayor to Councillor Richter. It actually is not just, I'm sorry if I implied that was the total cost. The additional costs are also due to, unfortunately, the scale of economy of the time. We've had an incredible increase in all our election materials. So that goes from everything from the ballots to the online system, which we use for the election systems, to the rental of the computers. And we've had a significant increase in even the vote counting machines. In 2018, we never would have anticipated that the vote election machines would cost more than double they did the previous one. Unfortunately, just the times and the demand for those machines and demand for all things, and the supply chain problems have resulted in a rather large increase.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just a side note, Ontario is having their election the week after, so I wonder if that has an effect on the demand on those machines. Councillor Kunst.
Do these costs also reflect what bylaws would have to do in order to make sure signs aren't in the wrong place, things like that? Or is that just part of their job?
Through the mayor to Councillor Kunst, no, unfortunately, those don't reflect the pickup of signs and other election-related costs that are taken on as a result of improper placement or other complaints.
So in fact, it could even be higher because I think that would probably.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
This is just to operate the actual election, this fund. Okay, great, thanks. We can move on.
It was requested to have a breakdown of those one-time items that were less than $50,000.
Okay, thank you.
There was also some discussion about the adding the library reserve fund and new library costs. So a memo was done that discussed the funding that it's providing for and it's to try to reduce the annual impact that we have from capital items in the library. So we have a new library coming on stream. We're relocating a library, and we also have a lot of furnishings that need replacing at the libraries, and new library materials. So this is really to spread out that funding so we're not hit with large chunks of funding requirements.
Thank you. Councillor Richter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to note that we're 2 minutes away from 1 o'clock. So should we be adjourning this meeting for another time?
Sure, I'll thank you for that. I'll ask staff about how much longer do we have in the presentation. I know our next meeting is scheduled to start at 1:30. We do have the flexibility to start it a bit later, up to half an hour later. So I'll just query staff to see where we are with this.
Your Worship, I think there's 6 or 7 slides to go, so it depends a bit on the discussion.
Maybe we can move through those, and then I'll take another look in 15 minutes and see. But we can delay the start of the next meeting up to half an hour.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Okay, we can go to the next slide.
So there was a request to discuss again or review again the use of the Restart Grant surplus. So the available funds are $7.6 million. There will be no Restart Grant available in 2023. So yes, it is a one-year funding solution.
Okay, thank you.
So
Councillor, I've got Councillor Richter with a question. Councillor Richter?
Yes, I just wanted to ask a question with regards to the Restart Grant, the 7.6 million. What does that equate to in terms of budget increase needed for next year, or budget cuts needed for next year?
Well, next year we will be returning the entirety of the funding that we would receive from recreation. So that's about $3 million. So that reduces the delta of that, but it would be about 3%.
Sorry, I
So,
can't hear you.
yeah, so, yeah, Ms. Ruff, if you could just, one thing, the question is, or the answer was to, with the restart program, with facilities opening up, there would be funds coming back from a recreation. And then if you just took this as a straight number, it's like 4%, I think is what Ms. Ruff was saying, 4% higher. However, I think council has lots of ways to look at the budget next year to reduce that or juggle things around. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on it. This is a one-time top-up, but does it necessarily have to affect future years' budgets?
So it's a one-time top-up, but we have cut down our revenues from recreation, which we cut down last year.
Mm-hmm.
So we are returning some of those revenues this year, and the entirety of those revenues will be returned next year. So that reduces that impact of the $7 million. So really, we're probably looking at a $4 million impact. And then staff will obviously look at other funding sources and other ways to meet our budget targets.
So are we sure we're going to get 3.5 million in revenue next year off the recreation? Like, will the programs be operating at 100% capacity?
That is our assumption. You have to make assumptions when you're doing a budget. This current year, we had reduced the 2021 year, we had reduced our revenue quite significantly, and we did meet that target of revenue. So I think they have a pretty good understanding of what we should be able to obtain.
Okay, so we're looking at least a 4% increase unless we take some things out next year. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Whitmarsh?
Yeah, thank you. My question was around this same thing, 7.608. We had made a motion from council at one point that we would use, up to this amount with the intention that maybe we wouldn't have to use all of it. So my question is the intention at this point to use the full amount this year and have none remaining for next year? Is that correct?
That is the way we've budgeted.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, there's no further questions on this.
So I just have a summary of the current budget before we revised it. So we'll revise that back to 3%.
Okay.
And then we just had 3 items that had come up since we had presented budget, reprioritization of some items that staff had noticed and brought forward to us. So we wanted to bring those forward at this time. So the Brookswood Heights Booster Station, it was requested that we reprioritize it from low to high due to some current factors. This will require us to use $25,000 from our Capital Works Reserve, but will not impact our 3% budget. The demolition of 27030 Fraser Highway, Alder Grove Gateway. So we will require $200,000 from the capital reserve, and there's a $250,000 that we already had as a carry forward. So we need to move that above the line. And then the Fort Langley pedestrian overpass, we've reprioritized that one as well. We have already got some funding in place, and so we want to make use of that funding and anticipate some further funding in the 2023.
Thank you. Councilor Richter?
Yes, with regards to the building demo and site remediation, is that for all the vacant buildings there, or is it just one of the buildings?
It's all of the buildings, right?
It's all of the buildings.
2 of the buildings.
Two of the
Yeah,
buildings.
well, there's 2. Yeah, the strip mall and the old restaurant. Okay, thank you.
I think there's 3. There's the, what is it, the fast food place, whatever it is there. So, yeah, but this is for 2 of them. Councilor Long?
Yeah, so to be clear then, the $200,000 that we have to spend because we refused the grant will wipe out the capital reserve. You said it was $250 in the, or almost wipe it out, I guess.
No.
Well, how much is in the capital reserve?
Oh, the 250 was from a different source, I believe, wasn't it?
Well, it's 200, right? I thought you said 200 from the 250.
No, sorry, we have 250 in our carry forward in the project from funding that we already have. So that was part of the original grant request. We said we had 250. Then we'll have another 200,000, so it's a $550,000 project.
So it's $550,000 to demolish. the
Sorry,
building.
450. My math isn't very good.
450, okay. Well, that's good to know. Yeah, it's a bit more than it says here, yeah, thanks.
Thanks.
Okay.
Councillor Woodward?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to comment in that regard. I'd be happy to move the motion for 197 to be moved above the line as necessary.
I don't know if this needs to be moved.
I thought I heard it needed some motions,
Yeah.
need to be moved
Yeah,
above the line or not, but maybe you could clarify. I'll move them if
Yeah,
necessary.
I'll check if any of these, I don't think we need a motion on this. This is just part of the capital budget bringing to our attention. Is that correct, Mr. Backen? Or if we do, I'll,
No, that's correct, Your Worship. This is how staff have interpreted some of the discussions and some of the realities out there. So this is just to notify you in terms of some of the changes that are occurring, but it doesn't affect the bottom line, nor does it require any motion at this point.
so to remove
Okay,
it.
that's good. I thought I heard Ms. Ruff say that had to be moved above the line, but if not, that's great. I just want to make sure that this has a chance to proceed. And I just want to mention for council's benefit in regards to the comments made about the building reserve, non-discretionary capital reserves went up by $22 million last year. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so no further questions on this one. We can move forward. No, people are getting.
So it's
ready
just
for
a
lunch.
revisit of our timeline. At this point, we were looking for direction as to whether we should go for further public input and report back to council.
Okay. Give it the next, give a slide on that.
Yeah.
There we go. So, well, thank you very much. Yeah, I have a question from Councillor Richter first, and then I'll go to the motion. So I just want to thank staff for bringing this to our attention. So I just want to be clear on the resolution that you're requesting, although council may want to do something else, is that the capital user pay utilities universal operating budgets goes to public consultation that as received and amended, and we did do an amendment, so that would go through 3%. So just be clear on that. And that this motion would then authorize you to bring back the results of the public consultation and the 5-year plan. So we could carry on the discussion. It doesn't by any means mean that this is a final decision on the budget. It's for consultation and for further reflection. Would that be correct?
Correct.
Fair to say? Okay, thanks. Councillor Richter, you had a question?
Yes, and after I ask the question, maybe I'll move the motion. What I would like to find out is we do have some items on our agendas today which appear to have financial impact going forward. Are those items on the agenda today covered by this budget? Yes or no?
So, Ms. Ruff?
No.
But they would, if council makes those decisions, some of them are capital, it wouldn't affect the operating budget. Some, I don't know if there's any operating, I can't recall. But that can still be adjusted, a budget can still be adjusted between now and final, or when it comes back. So the answer is no, that they're not contemplated because we haven't dealt with them, but it doesn't mean that they can't come in.
Okay, and if they do come in, does that mean we'll be increasing over the 3%?
There's obviously options to make further reductions in contribution to capital.
Okay. In that case, Mr. Mayor, I'll be pleased to move the resolution.
Okay, thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Kunst seconds. So moved by Councillor Richter, second by Councillor Kunst. I don't see any further discussion, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Thank you. Oh, sorry, who's opposed? Somebody opposed? No. Okay, good. Carries in. Councillor Ferguson. No, he's in favor. Okay, there is other business. So does that take us to the end of your presentation? Okay, thank you. So there's other business. Councillor Woodward had brought forward a notice of motion, and
Can that be referred to the next meeting?
so I'll ask Councillor Woodward if he wants us to refer. This could go to the end of the next meeting. Other business. We could take a break now and then take it to the other meeting. I don't think it'll. No.
Yeah, whatever your preference is, Mr. Mayor, just as long as it can, I don't know if procedurally it can still be added to the agenda of the other meeting or moved properly.
We can, because we've been given notice of the motion, so we can just if you make a motion just to refer this to the regular meeting, it then
I'll make that motion.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Councillor Richter seconds. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, and the next item is termination. Thank you. Seconder? All in favor? Who's second? Councillor Whitmarsh. Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
So are we back at 1:30 or later?
Mayor Froese will be reconvening at 1:30. Councillor Richter will be starting the regular council meeting at 1:40.
1:40. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.